Hi there, folks, and welcome back to our next session. Really looking forward to this one. A bit of a different subject from everything else you've had so far today. So, to help make this go a bit smoother, I'm going to be advancing the slides. So, if the slides are ever not advancing when they should, you know whose fault that is, just to put that out there nice and early. Um, so, I'm going to shut up and get out of the way. Kristina, the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Tom. All right. So, hi, everyone. My name is Kristina Rogers, and my session, as you can see here, is from Neurodivergent for Neurodivergent. Maybe you can advance, Tom. So, this session, I'm going to be focusing on a sharing of 5 tools that will help you as a neurodivergent designer. So, helping yourself. And then we're also going to be looking at what I consider 5 must-haves to make your learning neurodivergent inclusive. So I'm going to be covering 2 different territories. One is if you are a neurodivergent person, and then if you are helping those who happen to also be neurodivergent. Next, Tom. All right, so if you're here, I'm going to guess that you have been or you're currently impacted by neurodiversity in some capacity. And so you're probably intrigued what I can bring to the table. I'm curious to know, and Tom, you might have to help me here, but just in the chat, I don't know if anybody would be courageous enough to kind of raise a hand or throw an emoji out there or whatever. But I was curious to know how many here may be with that kind of impact. Or maybe we're just shy and not jumping in. There we go. I know I kind of put everybody on the spot, and that's kind of like not our thing. All right, Tom, we can advance. Thank you, Narissa. So clearly the topic is of interest. I know it is out there, and I know it's getting more and more mainstream. So you're probably wondering, why me? Why this topic? So here's a little bit rundown of that. So clearly, being here, I'm an L&D professional. I have 10 years of instructional design experience. That is what I do. However, I also have ADHD. And so, in this journey of being diagnosed and finding ways to manage my symptoms and educating myself, this very personal journey ended up colliding with what I do in the L&D world. Next slide. So, here's proof of that. This is my brain. As you can see, it's quite colorful, but let me explain a little bit here what you're looking at. This is a SPECT image scan of my brain that was done through the Amen Clinic. And I actually have 2 other versions of these images, but what I wanted to show you is the baseline. So this is me at rest, which is kind of crazy. You'll see on the left with all the rainbow, normal, I'm going to put that in quotes, neurotypical brains tend to have very smooth surfaces, and you can see mine's quite bumpy. And then the image on the right has to do with the brightness of the reaction, the activity that's happening inside. Again, a normal neurotypical brain, you wouldn't see much happening for sitting in a room for 15, 20 minutes doing absolutely nothing. But as you can see, as I've been told, I'm lit up like a Christmas tree. Think of fire where red is hot, but the white is hotter. So should you be having this much activity going on in the brain at rest? The answer is no, but this is an example of what it is to have that neurodivergent brain type. So I had to deal with this. I mean, it's interesting, and because of this, I really wanted to learn more, why and how does my brain work the way it works. So next slide, Tom. I read books like Carol Dweck's Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. I know that's where those, well, they've turned into buzzwords, I think, the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. It is a favorite book of mine. I think it was one of the very first that kind of spurred me in that journey to really understand how my brain type works. I've also read countless other books and articles, especially like from Dr. Hallowell of Attitude Magazine. So, in this process of learning how my neurodiverse brain works, and obviously there's aspects of that that overlap with the neurotypical brain, it really struck me as to why isn't this knowledge out there? Why is it not more common? And worst case, why isn't it part of the L&D world? Why is this not out there? Next slide. All right. Shout out to Lauren Waldman. I hope she hears about this. I'm putting a shameless plug in for her. So if you haven't heard of this course, or you haven't heard of learning scientist Lauren Waldman. So Lauren Waldman works with neuroscientists. She even has her own education in neuroscience. And she has created this amazing course. If you get the chance, please go take it. Essentially, she had her own version of what I have gone through earlier, sooner in life than me. And it's with this information that she has done something about it and is trying to really impact the L&D world to wake up to the fact that if we're helping people learn, we really should know how our brains learn. So make sure you go check that out. All right, Tom. So anyway, we're not here to dive into how brains learn, especially neurotypical brains, but we're here to dive into what we can do or use to help manage our neurodiverse brains, especially when it comes to our end as a designer. And then, of course, what I'll discuss a little bit later when it comes to creating learning for neurodiverse learners. Next slide. All right. So although I'm going to share with you 5 specific tools that are beneficial, and I would like to define or clarify here what I mean by tools. I don't mean just super magnificent technologies that I can throw in your lap and it's going to make life easy and wonderful. No. I am giving you physical, digital, mental. I mean, it's an assortment of things. As far as that lovely magical technology that's going to take care of everything, if you haven't figured it out, life doesn't work that way. So please don't have that expectation here. What I will be sharing with you, you do have to make an effort for it to really be most beneficial to you. Next slide. I will also like to stress that although I am sharing this information, and this comes from experience and studies and whatnot that I have personally checked out, this is not a situation where I am an all-knowing being of all things neurodiversity, let alone ADHD. So if there's something that comes up as you're listening to me, maybe it spurs something, you're like, oh my gosh, that reminds me of this other tool and it's worked for me, please do share it in the chat. I really want this to be a community effort here. My big thing is that our brains don't all work exactly the same way. My my theory has been, in a lot of studies I've seen, and I know it's come closer and closer to this, but I don't think I've seen anyone come out straight in saying this. I think definitively, and I think it's just because there's more research that they're wanting to support it. But in the same way we have our composition, hair color, eye color, skin color, it's pretty unique. I really believe that that's what it comes to our brains. We just each individually have a very different brain that has preferences, that runs certain ways, that focuses in certain ways. And we're just not there yet. We're just not there in understanding fully what that is. with that, I would say, be careful. I know this is terrible, but I want to address the zombie in the room. There is no such thing as learning styles. So, any thoughts of considerations of that going, oh, well, it's just because my brain is more audio or more visually, just throw that out the window, please. Non existent. Okay. But to all this, again, I just really want to share that even though I'm sharing things from my experience, please feel free to jump in and share what you know has worked, because even though the majority tends to work while doing one thing, it's not an end all be all where it works across the board for everybody. And I'm aware of that. So I just wanted to make sure we're all in the end. All right, Tom. And we're going to dive in. So next slide, please. Awesome. Okay. And by the way, these tools are in no particular order. So don't be like, oh my gosh, this is the first thing I have to do. No, not necessarily. So the first tool I want to share is move your body. So I know you're like, oh my gosh, I know there's so many studies about exercise and whatever. Yeah, but let's push this a little bit more. So having that perspective of neurodivergent, it's extremely helpful for the brain. And I know in the workspace, that's quite challenging to make happen. But it's been proven too many times over the correlation between moving your body and either stimulating or getting, the dopamine or serotonin in the brain to get functioning, right? Because as neurodivergent people, our brains have a little bit of struggle with that. So if you are able to, make sure that you are making yourself get up and move, or use, I don't think I have it next to me. I don't. A fidget cube. If you're stuck at your desk and you really can't do anything, if you're able to switch out your chair for a yoga ball, which I am sitting on right now, maybe that's something you can also look into, to allow yourself to fidget, to allow your body to move. But I would really make sure that you're putting in time throughout your day to step away. If you're in an office space, which I've been there because I work from home right now, it's a little different. But if you're in an office space, make sure that you're stepping away and taking a walk. See if you can take the stairs. I would, and I'm not the only one who's done this, because I've come across colleagues with ADHD that have done this, where the bathroom is on the floor above or below, and they'll purposely take the stairs just to move their body a little bit more while they're getting up to go to use the restroom. So finding little tricks like that is very helpful. If you're working from home, obviously, depending on weather, see if you can just go out for a walk and then come back and keep going. But it's really important to do what you can to really help with that fact that your brain kind of lags and you need that extra stimulation going. All right, next one, Tom. All right, this one's going to be a little probably controversial. Scrum board, or I know some people prefer the Kanban board. So the reason I say this is controversial is because I've come across neurodiverse folks that they're not fans of this. And I understand why. It's looked at this annoying admin thing. Totally get it. I really do. However, what I have learned is that in choosing to put the effort to really make time to get yourself organized is really important and can really help you be successful. It's not easy to do, and I understand that, but our brains tend to run 100 miles an hour in so many different directions. And sadly, allowing our brains to do their thing, which I make fun. This is probably going to sound bad, but I call it my toddler brain, because that's what this brain does. It doesn't regulate emotion, so it has tantrums. It doesn't want to work. It doesn't want to do this or that or whatever. And you have to manage that. And it's not easy, and it takes a ton of time and practice to do so, but it's worth it. And so in addition to that, it comes down to getting yourself organized. I really have learned to love my Scrum board. I had to use it with work. I use it personally as well. You can kind of see a little bit of my sticky notes. I have a physical one rather than a digital one on my wall. So it really helps to stay in line, stay focused. And I feel like it works in two ways. It helps manage my brain in addition to managing my tasks and my projects. So I know a lot of folks are not keen on this as a neurodiverse individual, but I highly recommend that if you're not doing it already, at least look into it and maybe start practicing this. Just like everything in life, the more you do, it'll get easier over time. Next one, Tom. All right, notebook. This seems probably really silly, but in the same way of organizing with a Scrum board, notebook is fantastic. Lined is great. I have had my moments where bullet is wonderful because we as neurodiverse, we need structure, but then sometimes it's like too much structure. And so we need some flexibility, and a bullet journal does great with that. But I I had to say some of these tools I was really skeptical with, but I have learned that they tend to do wonders. So I don't have anything super fancy. I literally have a notebook in front of me, and I put the date at the top, and whatever comes up, I literally write it down. Just anything and everything. If it's a brain dump of things like I need to do later in the day, if it's a project, I have to take notes with my colleague about what we're working on. I literally put everything, and I do not do shorthand, by the way, because I know that if I go back at a later time, I'm going to be like trying to decipher my own writing. What did I mean by this? What was I writing here? So it takes time, it takes energy, and I get that, but it's very much worth it, especially with those moments come, because they do come when someone's asking you to refer back to something. In addition to yourself needing to check in, it's really nice to have that ability just to go, give me a second. And yes, of course, you're going to have to flip through a little bit, but you're going to find the information and then you can keep going. So it's pretty great. All right, next one, Tom. Mindset. Okay, so with any project, task, anything you do, and this is really a tricky balance to create, but you need to put in effort, but you need to give yourself grace. Okay. And so, what I mean by that is with your mindset, be fully aware of the kind of brain type you have. And if you haven't already, start figuring out what you have control over. Okay. So, when you have that control over certain aspects of, and I'll give myself as an example. Let's say I try to minimize my ADHD symptoms by creating, I'm going to put this in quote, rules for how I need to conduct myself. And I remind myself those rules every day and do my best to follow through with them. And that comes with awareness, and that definitely comes with effort. Okay. And some of this, I will even admit a tool, and this is outside of what I'm sharing here, mindful meditation, and I won't get into it because that's a whole other trajectory. But in that effort, you can actually organize yourself and manage yourself in such a way to leverage those struggles, if you will, with your brain to complete tasks. Not easy at all. Again, repetition and time will help you get stronger at this. Mindful meditation is a fantastic tool to really gain strength in your mind to overcome those kinds of hurdles. Now, I am fully aware that sometimes you can manage. Notice I said manage, you can't control. You can manage how your thinking is or your focus. But then there's times where the brain really just does its thing and it pulls the rug from under you, and it is what it is, right? In those moments, or I should say immediately after those moments, give yourself grace. Be aware and understand that you had capability to manage only certain aspects of what was going on up to a certain point. And then the brain just did its thing. It took over. It, I don't know, decided to have a tantrum. It decided that it didn't want to focus no matter what your efforts were. And just to breathe through that, just do your best to let it go. I think this is a great opportunity at times where you can go, all right, I'll do that whole move your body thing, and I'm going to go take a walk and come back and kind of resettle and start again. But this is the game we have to play. And it all comes down to your mindset. It's accepting and being aware of the kind of brain type you have and working with it. So tricky, but it can be done. All right, next one, Tom.
Oh, just before we move
Oh,
on, we did get a
sure.
quick question there, just
Yeah.
asking how exactly the scrum board works. Um,
Oh, okay. We can go back to that slide if you'd like. I know that was like 3 earlier, I think. There we go. So the scrum board, how it works is that you have the project, you see it on the far left. I would say, okay, I'll give a generic example. I have to create its e-learning module. Okay. And then you break that into tasks. You know, maybe I have to write a script and a storyboard. Then I have to open up Captivate or Articulate Storyline. I have to create my my template. Have to get screenshots. I mean, there's many things that you can break it down. That would be under your to-do list, and they would be all separated out. And then as you work on it, you'll just move that one task that you're working on into in progress. And you can have multiples in different areas. You don't have to just do one at a time. And then you'll move it over to the done column. And it just helps you, as the saying goes, right? How do you eat an elephant? Well, it's one bite at a time. And that's much easier to take on than just, oh my gosh, I have this project to do and I have to get it done by this date or whatever. And so this just helps you take those bite-sized bits at a time. So there you go.
Brilliant. Thank you. I'll whip us through the next couple of slides to get us back to where we were.
Thank you, Tom. There we go. So timer. All right, this is another one. I admit I was extremely skeptical of this. I've only started using it recently, and I now understand why it's a great tool. So with the timer, I will say there are studies and pushes out there of, and this is obviously in a more neurotypical world where you do 20 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break and then you focus for 20 minutes on a task and take a 5-minute break and you do like 4 sets of those and then you take a 30-minute break and then you'll do it all over again. There's different versions of that out there. Kudos if you could do that. I've learned with this brain, that's just not happening. And I used to fight it and I used to get upset and just like, well, forget it. Timers don't work for me. What I have learned, and I've come across other neurodiverse folks too, is that again, that push and pull between effort and grace is you have to allow yourself that flexibility. It's really interesting how paradoxical we tend to be. We need structure, but we don't need structure. Same thing happens here with a timer. And so what I've learned is that there are times that I need to seriously focus on a task. The brain doesn't want to, but it needs to be done. I got to work, right? So what I have found to work for me, I'm not saying this is going to work for everybody. You will have to trial and error and figure out what works best for you. But what I'll do is I'll put a timer for 15 minutes and just I'm 15 minutes on this one task. If by the end of the task, I'm like, I'm done, I don't want any more of this, cool, that's fine. At least I made some progress in that one area, and I'll switch to a different task. However, what tends to happen, I have found out unintentionally, I'll go in with that thinking, going, oh, I'm giving myself 15 minutes. I just need to work a little bit on this, and then I'll switch over to something else. Near the end of the 15 minutes, in my case for ADHD, the H part, the hyperness, the hyper focus kicks in. And suddenly, like, I don't want to stop. I want to keep going. And so what I'll do is then I'll reset the timer for an hour. Now, I don't let myself just go do whatever my brain wants. I still need to manage my brain. But that's what I would do is I give myself an hour, give myself a break. And then if I want to continue and I have something else to work on that, great. And if I need to do that, kind of a small start before I, possibly can dive in more, great. And if I need to switch tasks to something else that's come up, then I will make myself do that kind of similar thing, give myself 5, 10 minutes, 15, depending what it is, and get something done. Now, I mentioned I have listed executive function. That's because our brain types don't really have an executive function ability, time management being one of those pieces. I'm not sure about other, I know it overlaps with a lot of other neurodiverse, like autism and even, symptoms and disorders like OCD. But I don't think it's 100% across the board. But I know with ADHD, we do not have a concept of time. Our brains just, I don't know how else to explain. We just don't comprehend that. We see time as only two things. It's either now or later. There's never this in between or understanding of how to measure time. And that's very, very challenging when you have deadlines. You're thinking, oh, that's in 2 weeks. Well, that just means later. If you tell me something's in 15 minutes, that's another weird version of later in some aspects. Or I'll start taking it as now. And that's where the anxiety comes in of, oh my gosh, there's this thing looming. And neurotypical people don't have that. They actually can measure out time. I had an example shared with me of, I guess this is the best way as an analogy for those who may not be understanding me. They said, like, if you're cooking something on a stove and you go and you reach for the pot without a, mitten or anything, and you don't protect yourself, and you hold it there for a moment, and you let go and you look at your hand and it's red and you might have blisters, depending on the heat, and you're looking at everything, but you're not getting the sensory, to your brain to give you that reaction of ouch. But you're having to, I look at it almost like manually putting the information together, the cues together to go, oh, that was hot. I burned myself. That's not okay. And it's weird that happens like that, but that's essentially how it works when it comes to time for us. We have to base it off of a lot of outside cues to kind of form this idea of time, but we really don't have a grasp of time and measuring it. So it's a little funky, but that's where I think the timer can be extremely helpful. Gamifying with the timer, I have seen success in that. I don't personally do this, but I have read upon people who have. An example of this, I think this one was hilarious. This gentleman that after he cooks in the kitchen, he knows he needs to clean up after. And again, the brain doesn't want to and all that. So what he'll do is he'll put a timer and he tells himself a story that he's a spy and that he needs to make sure he gets rid of all evidence that he was ever there. And it's a gamification piece, which is really funny considering sometimes what we end up creating are gamified scenarios for our learners, but it is something that can assist us in focusing or getting into a hyper focus point to be able to get things done. So there you have it. All right, Tom. All right, so changing gears, we're going to go look into some things that we can create for our neurodiverse learners. I will give you a heads up that uh, I'm sure if not all of these, some of these are going to be like, well, that works for a neurotypical person. Like, you haven't taught me anything new. I want you to try to look at things a little differently and try to look from that neurodivergent perspective. So the guidelines might be the same, but they may not transfer quite what you think the way that they would be for a neurodiverse learner. So, all right, Tom. Okay, so the biggest one I have for you is covering territory. And what I mean by that is, again, all brains work a bit different, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical. And I still believe we're getting to a point that someday it'll be proven like a fingerprint almost. And so sometimes we learn one way for one thing, but that kind of learning doesn't work for another thing. We're kind of all over the place. I think it's way more noticeable or way worse. I hate to say worse, but when it comes to a neurodiverse individual. So I know that everyone is on this hype about e-learning and it's the one all be all to solve all problems, even though we all know that's true. I'm sure many of you have read Kathy Moore's book, Map It, has beautiful examples of that factor that there's other solutions to learning, gaps or whatever. But ultimately, I think we should go above and beyond whenever possible to have different forms of that same task or change or whatever that you're having to teach your audience. So if it's an e-learning, great. Infographics are awesome. Job aids, podcasts, micro learning. I mean, there's so many things you can do. Do as many as you can. And I say this because of how our brains work. You're allowing for opportunity for repetition to occur as well, which is really great. And to me, it also taps into our need for stimulation. So sitting there for an e-learning or a webinar that you're just getting lectured at, apologies, by the way, for that. We get antsy, right? It's like, okay, that's great. And I know neurotypicals have this to a degree, but like neurodiverse, again, not to say it bad, but we have it worse. So at least if you're giving them options, maybe they started the e-learning, but something happened and they can't focus. They can at least look at an infographic, that's bright and colorful. And then, okay, maybe they want some hands-on practice. They refer to a job aid. I mean, the sky's the limit, but just try to cover as much territory as you can for them. All right, next one, Tom. All right, this is an example of that. You're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I know. We need to make sure we have good design for everybody. Yes. But I'm going to take this a step further from the neurodiverse perspective. So minimal, yes, we want something attractive. And I give the example, you don't want blue text on a red background. For a neurotypical person, when you do something of that kind of poor design, it's just, well, first off, if they even notice, it's amazing. But if they do notice, it's just, for them, it's annoying. It's bothersome. It's ugly. That's probably the extent of it. With a neurodiverse person, we have our sensitivity highly engaged. Like it is several notches up compared to a neurotypical person. And so, oddly, I guess, in some aspects, that's how it's viewed. But when you have something of poor design, such as blue text on a red background, it actually creates pain for us. I know for a neurotypical, there's probably like, what are you talking about? It's just, for us, because we're so sensitive to, in this case, let's say color and lighting, it actually does penetrate the brain as a form of pain. The same thing can be said of sound. So, making sure that you have very clean audio versus maybe where you have some, pockets of things popping here and there. So, I won't dive into it too much. I know we're kind of short on time here, but just keep that in mind as you're creating for your learner. You might have some neurodiverse folks in there and you don't want to cause them pain unintentionally, of course. So make sure that your designs are really well done. All right, next slide, Tom. All right, so speaking of audio, again, this is also going to kind of overlap with neurotypicals a little bit here with the fact that you want your audio to complement your visual, or you want your visual to complement your audio. It's one or the other. Otherwise, if you have them at equal capacity, they're just going to cancel things out. So if you have text, which I can't believe I'm saying this, but let's say you have a huge paragraph of text and the audio is just reading it to you, sometimes that can cancel things out. And worse is when you have such like a paragraph or bullets or something that's just overwhelming and the audio doesn't match verbatim. That really cancels things out big time. So keep that in mind. Your audio complements your visuals, or your visuals are complementing your audio. Make sure you're getting text options. So have closed captions, have a transcript. Okay. Again, that's just the stimulation part. It also comes down to the comprehension piece. So with our brain types, and I hate saying this, but it's the reality, we have difficulty sometimes with comprehending information, whether that's audio or even reading text and instructions. I don't know why, but somehow the message by the time it gets to our brains gets scrambled. So, if you don't know this already, how the brain works is that it's constantly being fed information from your senses, and gaps occur. And when gaps occur, your brain, due to survival mode, and I don't mean just survival like out in the wilderness, I mean like social survival. We don't want to be turned to an outcast from the community. The brain fills in those gaps. For a neurodiverse person, sometimes those gaps are not accurately filled in, and sometimes they're not filled in at all. And our brains kind of left us hanging. So having text options allows us to go back and review or compare as we're listening, and really emphasize to make sure that we're really getting that information down, and not having it getting scrambled. So at least it allows that opportunity. I put in here speed options, and I know that this is like, oh, but I don't want my learner to like put it at the highest speed and just listen like crazy and get through everything. And I totally understand that. I put the speed option of the audio being like 1.5 or 2. I don't think higher than that would be functional, but I know I've seen it on YouTube. However, it really helps us stay more engaged. It helps with the stimulation factor. It can be helpful. I'm not saying it's always helpful, but at least having that option to kind of keep us engaged into what's happening is quite helpful. Repetition options, the same thing, being able to rewind, pause, again, helps us just because we have those moments where we kind of tune out. It's just the reality. We do it quite frequently. So being able to catch ourselves, I mean, that comes on our effort, but as a learner, if you catch yourself, having the opportunity to go, oh, okay, let me pause. Let me just go back a couple seconds and play again. That's quite nice. I know it's a luxury, but it is helpful. All right, next one, Tom. All right, interactivity. You want to get engaged as soon as possible for legit reasons, okay? And the point of the engagement in either e-learning or in-person training and everything is to help us create dots as learners and to be able to connect those dots. And so having those, I don't know, drop in drag things, I mean, it's great. Just make sure that it's actually emphasizing and really helping with what needs to be learned and not there just to fill in space. Last one, Tom. All right. And then this gets into repetition as my final one. Simulation, I cannot stress enough how important that is to echo real life. Having that safety net in case they make mistakes, it's not a big deal. I'm a huge advocate of the AGES model, and that's attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. And so this is part of that factor. You want that repetition, but you want it over time. Having opportunity to sleep in between these types of learnings is really good because the brain needs sleep. But this is my final piece that, anything that you can create for your learner to really echo real life, give them hands-on opportunities, and to do it as many times as they want really goes a long way. So, all right, Tom, last slide. I will open it up to questions. I know I only have 5 minutes left, but if you guys have anything, curiosities even, I'm open for conversation, discussion.
Fantastic. Well, just while we're waiting for, there's a bit of a lag with the chat, of course.
Sure.
But just while we're waiting for that, one question I've sort of got on these kinds of topics is getting an organization to give time, money, resources to design for any level of accessibility can be tricky. But I feel like we've made a lot of ground on what we might call standard web accessibility considerations.
Yes.
This feels like it's the next step. But how do we start having those conversations from your perspective? How do I bring this up to my senior leadership team and say, hey, we need to pay attention to this?
Right. So my recommendation is first and foremost, educate yourself as much as possible to where, as funny as it sounds, it just oozes out from you. Like you can't hide it. You know this information and you can't unsee it around you. And I think having those organic conversations that spur with your teams, just in the moment you kind of catch something, it reminds you of something and you want to share it with them. I think that kind of pushes that normality of having that conversation, and everybody just kind of, gets more comfortable over time. And I think that, and then helping that like a fire, right, to kind of spread, then it's going to make its way further up the food chain, if you will. Um, I wouldn't be hesitant. I know that's not easy to do, but I think it's really important just to have that self-confidence and build little by little. It's not going to be all at once, but if you can at least, voice those thoughts and what you're learning, I think that can really help.
Cool. I'm gonna do a follow-up question, like a
Yeah.
real journalist follow-up question.
Yeah.
No, it's about educating ourselves.
Yeah.
If I was like, right, that's now what I'm going to do this afternoon, where's the first place I should start looking for good information about this?
Oh my goodness. There's just so many things. I mean, I know one is I would go check out things posted by Lauren Waldman because she really pushes for the neuroscientists in her life. And I would go check out who she's following, the neuroscientists that she is connected with, and see what they're posting because they tend to post a lot of that, the studies that they come across and what they're involved in. Neuroscience news I have found to be pretty good. Now their studies are kind of all over the place. You're going to have to filter to determine which one has to do with learning specifically, but those are really fascinating. And they're a type of translation, if you will, from the hard academia writing to more of layman terms. And so I find that very beneficial as well. Outside of that, um, it's kind of tricky about generic neurodiversity because they immediately kind of spur into their own specific types. So, I mean, I can give you offline, specific that I have found with ADHD specifically, but yeah, it's a little tricky after that because I haven't seen too many generic. It's more everyone kind of gets into their groove.
And that's understandable. We do have a couple of lots of really great comments about how eye-opening this was and how interesting it was, which is great to hear.
Awesome.
And it's such an insightful presentation. So many things I want to put into my own workflow as a fellow ADHDer. And I like that as a verb. I like that. That's good.
Yeah.
And there's so much overlap with best accessibility practice. I've got a question here
Sure.
from Erica. Kristina, thank you for the presentation. Accessibility is the right thing to do, but have you seen outcome of these efforts in a measurable way help drive buy-in in the organization?
I wish I have. I have not yet. And I think part of that is I think the assessment tools, right? For, at the end of, I don't know, let's say a module or in-person course or whatever that's being conducted. I hate to say this, but I don't think most of us who are neurodiverse are feeling comfortable enough yet to give more honest answers and feedback just because there's still a stigma with it. And so I think until we kind of move a little bit further and kind of get over that piece, and it's going to take time, I don't think our results at the end are going to really reflect the way that we hope and want them, so that way we can adjust what we're creating for them. But I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer for that.
An
But that's
honest
a great
answer is always
question.
the best answer. That's
Oh,
the,
no. Well,
that's it.
we're making progress. Yeah.
And sometimes that, not that long ago, that's where we were with even let's add captions to videos. Like a couple of years ago, that was a big
Yeah.
deal, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now the idea of not doing it is unthinkable. And it would be
Yes.
nice to think maybe if we come back next year, maybe
Yeah.
we'll have moved on. We
Yeah.
can hopefully all be part of moving that on. Uh,
Yes.
well, thank you ever so much. This was a phenomenal session. I think we all learned
Awesome.
a huge amount. The next session is in just under 15 minutes, everyone. Activate AI automation with Jennifer Foster. So another really interesting, and AI is the topic of the moment,
Oh,
after
yeah.
all. And it's our first specific look at it at the event so far. So do come and join us. Kristina, thank you once again. And thank you everyone in the
Awesome.
audience for getting involved in the chat.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
iSpring is an e-learning software provider dedicated to streamlining e-learning worldwide. With a team of top industry specialists, they create tools that make e-learning both efficient and enjoyable. Their AI-powered course creation tool, iSpring Suite, and the iSpring Learn LMS are the top choices for thousands of instructional designers, L&D pros, and content developers. Crafted with the user workflow in mind, iSpring ensures a seamless experience for the creation of impactful